I don't know about you, but I'm really sick of AI branding on otherwise good bits of tech. This Acer Nitro 14, an otherwise decent machine and one that has remarkably little to do with AI at all, has the phrase plastered all over the marketing materials. The product page on Acer's website for this bad boy contains no less than 25 uses of the phrase AI. AI for gaming, AI for creating, AI for productivity and entertainment, RTX for AI, discover the AI advantage. It goes on and on and on. It drives me mad, mostly because it's completely meaningless. So let's scrap the AI crap and focus on the real stuff, like the fact that this is actually a really nice machine and one that I actually recommend. Let's find out why. So what actually is this thing? This is the Acer Nitro 14, a 14.5 inch, relatively thin, relatively light, budget gaming laptop from Acer. Their Nitro line can be a little hit and miss as Acer tries to balance features with the price tag, but honestly, I think they've got this one right on the money. Considering the price tag, that we'll get into pretty shortly, this is a remarkably premium and well-built device. Of course, it's no MacBook Pro, but for a budget Windows gaming laptop, it sure does feel nice. The keyboard is Acer's pretty standard fully RGB backlit affair. It's a little mushy, for all gaming laptops seem to be these days, but it's nice enough to use. The trackpad is pretty massive, taking up basically all of the available space, and as you'd expect, it tracks really well. I/O-wise, you get an HDMI port, two USB 3 Type-A ports, one on either side, and two USB 4 Type-C ports, also one per side, which I think also support USB PD as well as display outputs. You've got a barrel jack for DC in and a combo headphone jack, as well as a microSD card reader. The display is somewhere that Acer has sort of cut a corner on to meet the price tag, but not so much that it's a problem. This is a 1200p 120Hz IPS panel with, in my testing, over 100% coverage of the sRGB spectrum, or 80% DCI-P3, just shy of 350 nits of peak brightness, a 1400:1 contrast ratio, and a delta E of 1.86 on average, making it a very decent content consumption display. The accuracy does mean that it isn't too bad for content creation either, although it isn't quite as rich as higher end panels offering more like 90 to 100% coverage of DCI-P3. Still, at least for everyday use, this really isn't bad. For gaming, well, it isn't exactly amazing. With the LCD overdrive setting in the NitroSense app disabled, you're looking at 23.4 milliseconds on average for the response time. That translates into quite the smeary experience, especially with fast motion. Take a look at some high-speed footage of Aperture Gorilla's frog pursuit test. See how long the trail is behind the purple frog? It's actually so slow that it doesn't really finish drawing the frame at any point before moving again. That's how slow it is. With overdrive on, it does better, down to 16.27 milliseconds, but that's still basically 60 Hz. So again, looking at the high-speed footage, well, there's still quite the trail. It is a little better, but still not what I'd call great. It's still perfectly playable to be sure, but it's not a fast display. Luckily, the input lag is spot on, especially thanks to the onboard mux switch that switches between the RX 780M that's onboard the CPU and the RTX 4050 dedicated GPU. Actually, since we're talking about specs, let me walk you through it. My model at least comes equipped with a Ryzen 7 8845HS 8-core 16-thread CPU, which has an RX 780M GPU built in. That comes with 16GB of DDR5 RAM and 512GB of NVMe SSD space, and then there's the RTX 4050 with 6GB of GDDR6 VRAM too. That SSD is the bane of my reviewer existence, as my usual test suite of games now encroaches on a terabyte in space, So with only 500 gigs to play with here, I have to rotate out the games just to be able to test them all. And it means that you will only be able to fit 1 or 2 games on this thing before thinking about an upgrade, which, unlike Acer's larger machines like the Nitro V15, is going to be a fair bit harder, as this doesn't have a spare M.2 slot inside just waiting to be populated. You will need to replace the main drive, which means at minimum reinstalling the operating system, or maybe cloning the existing drive, but that can be a pain, which, needs another system handy as well. I do wish they would charge like £10 more and just put a 1TB drive in this thing instead. Anyway, the other thing you might notice in there is a distinct lack of RAM. The 16GB included is all you're gonna get here, as there aren't any modules ripe for upgrades. One thing that shouldn't need an upgrade though is the thermal paste. As the sticker on the palm rest says, this bad boy already has liquid metal, which might explain why this thing runs remarkably cool for a gaming machine. The cooling solution is actually remarkably quiet, despite sporting dual fans, even under load, although I think I know why. While the CPU is free to draw a little over 80 watts under full CPU loads, although it stabilizes to 75 watts, it runs relatively cool for a laptop, let alone a thin one around 80 degrees Celsius under full load. But the GPU is limited to a maximum of 60 watts. That is incredibly low for a gaming laptop, with many 3060 based machines that I've tested running up at 140 watts or more, so a 4050 at 60 watts likely won't be great, right? Well, surprisingly, no, it's actually really good. At the native 1920 by 1200, even on Fortnite in DirectX 12 high with no TSR, it runs above 60 FPS. Microsoft Flight Simulator runs at over 75 FPS average, Starfield on low hits 84 FPS average, Cyberpunk on medium hits 107 FPS, Shadow of the Tomb Raider nearly 123 FPS, Hitman 3's GPU data reports 135 FPS average, CS2 is up at 231, and Siege hits 241. That's all really not bad. All of these games, even the intensive ones, are totally playable, and if you want to make more use of the 120Hz display, you've still got room to drop the settings a little. That's really not bad. At 1080p, for the sake of comparison, you'll find the Nitro 14 matching or beating the Nitro V15, an RTX 4060 based machine, and the Triton Neo 16, also a 4060 machine. In CS2, the Nitro 14 hits 217 FPS average, beating the 209 of the V15, and sitting between the Triton Neo's performance and turbo mode runs. Cyberpunk has the N14 doing well, beating the V15 by 6 FPS, not bad considering both the power and spec difference. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is about the same, with the Nitro 14 ahead of the Triton and V15, at least slightly. Microsoft Flight Simulator has the V15 2 FPS ahead of the Nitro 14, so essentially tied there. Hitman 3's GPU data shows the actual difference here. The V15's 4060 is a good 12 FPS faster than the 4050 in the Nitro 14, which makes a lot of sense. The actual in-game performance though is likely very similar, if not actually slightly better than the N14, or in the N14's favour. Siege again has the N14 ahead of the V15 despite its spec disparity by almost 10 FPS no less. In short, this really does seem like a decent performer despite the low spec GPU and minimal power limits. Likely a decent amount of that performance difference comes from the CPU allowing the GPU more room to breathe compared to the V15. The 7735HS in that V15 offers 24% less performance than the 8845HS in Cinebench multi-threaded, and 22% slower in the Blender Gooseberry Render 2. This 8845HS keeps up with the 13900H and 155H, these names are terrible man, as well as the M2 Pro from Apple. On the whole, the actual gaming experience feels pretty decent. The performance itself is solid, and while the display isn't exactly the smoothest, it's certainly crisp enough and does deliver an enjoyable gaming experience, even if it isn't exactly a pro esports display. The keyboard feels nice too, and means that the actual gaming experience on this thing is a pretty good type. Of course, what makes that better is that, at least at the time of filming, you will only have needed to spend £850 to get this thing. For an entire gaming laptop, and a pretty nice one at that, that seems like a great value for money. Genuinely, the build quality would make you think that this was like a £1,500 machine, not almost half that. And for the performance is on par with pricier machines too. Well, I do wish that they charged you £860 and put an actually usable sized drive in there, especially because upgrading it yourself isn't exactly a simple, experience due to the lack of a second drive slot there. On the whole, I still happily recommend this thing. Good job, Acer. Of course, those are my thoughts, but I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below. What do you think of the Nitro 14? Is this a machine you're interested in picking up, especially at this sort of price point? Is it not for you? Would you rather spend a little bit more and get a higher spec GPU, or a higher wattage GPU at least, for example? Let me know in the comments down below. If you want to check out the machine, I will leave a link to it in the description, and if you want to check out my own hardware, the open source response time tool that I use to test machines like this, that's linked in the description as well at osrtt.com. You can also check out the subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this one. Check out plenty of other reviews on the end cards, including the laptops playlist. And otherwise, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you all in the next video.